Sanja, how are you doing?
I'm doing great. I love this like every Tuesday seeing you and everybody here. So all smiles.
Yeah,
How are
well, yeah,
you?
I'm doing real well. I'm in San Mateo, California, just south of San Francisco today. Not in my home in Santa Cruz. I'm actually having a great conversation with Stacia and Danny of Red Thread Research. So, yeah, it's been a fun day so far. So, and yeah, I shared what we're going to be talking about today, namely the people priorities or going into 2023. What are people thinking about as we approach the year? And I know you've been thinking about that as well. So, yeah, and by the way, if you're joining us for the first time, we're live streaming on LinkedIn. Uh, if you have questions, by all means, ask them as we go. We're going to be asking you all some questions. We want this to be a dialogue, and we'll capture some of the insights that you provide us and package them back send them out via our newsletter. And the last thing I will say, because I do not want to forget, is that in just over 2 weeks, we're going to be in Austin, Texas for Question Pro X Day on the 27th, which is a Thursday. And the night before, on the 26th, we're going to do a PAL Connect at Easy Tiger East there in Austin. So we'll be talking about not only people priorities, but people analytics, employee listening, a bunch of other cool stuff. So very excited about that. So Sanja, let me get out of the way. For those who are joining us for the first time, you want to introduce yourself?
I will. And actually, as you were saying that, I was like, oh, wait, let me get the link for the login for X Day because I'm so incredibly happy. And where do I put it? Wait, maybe I'll keep talking because now I'm like, I don't know where to put it in the messages.
You
Oh,
can put it
hold
in the
on.
chat, or you can put it in the private chat. One of the two.
I'll put it in the private chat and then you can maybe help me get it to the right spot. So I'll introduce myself. Yes, I feel like we're all friends here now. So I feel like, well, wait a minute, how could people not know me? But of course, some still do not because we're not sitting around having coffee like it feels to me. So I'm Sanja Lucina. I am the president of Question Pro Workforce, sitting in beautiful Buenos Aires, Argentina. I am an organizational psychologist. I'm a mom of an incredible 4-year-old, a spouse, maybe some days a good one. I try. A daughter, but including all of that, what we're going to talk about today is um, just somebody who is so incredibly passionate about making the world of work better. And I think it's a moving target. I think how we approach that is why we're here to discuss it. And yeah, so out of all the many things that I am, that's what we're going to focus on today. I will try not to talk about Mateo as much as I usually do, which is my son.
Well,
Al, what about you? I feel like everybody definitely knows you, but still, maybe for some of those who are joining us for the first time in our banter, could you introduce yourself, please?
gosh, I haven't introduced myself in a long time. I, uh,
Mhm.
I'll do that quickly. I always introduce myself first and foremost as a father. Our son Cash is 21 now. Daughter Ava is 19. I am what's commonly known as an empty nester. So I'm in deep therapy about that. It's all good. It's all good.
I'll lend you Mateo for a little bit if you're ever having like really deep withdrawals. I'll ship him over your way for a little
Good,
bit.
good to know. And the reason I start off that, and as I do when I speak publicly, is they are entering the workforce, and the experience that they have is going to be either consciously or unconsciously based on data that is being collected that they're generating, again, consciously or unconsciously, and also the fact that the amount of opportunity that's present in the world today, despite everything that's happening in Ukraine, energy crisis, the inflation. I mean, these are very, shall we say, dynamic times with a lot of disruption and anxiety, as a result. So I am frankly working on their behalf and trying to advocate so people, not only those who are leadership positions, hiring managers, are conscious about the experience that they're giving their employees, but organizationally, how are we creating systems, processes, and cultures of inclusion that are going to honor the unique contributions of all peoples, young and old, different groups, and what have you. So I'm very purpose driven, and how well I do is up for debate, but I try. So that's where I'm at, and that's the reason we created this forum, and we're calling it Idea Share. So we can actually share not only our own ideas, but capture the ideas from those in the audience. So as we go, by all means, ask questions, offer perspectives and ideas, and not that we'll do this with everybody, but we'll bring a few and highlight them on the screen, like I just did with Question Pro X Day right there. So with that, love to talk about people priorities. So what are you seeing emerging heading into year end in prep for 2023, Sanja?
Yeah. Well, first caveat, which I also put on my LinkedIn, is I get that we have like a few months left of 2022. I get that there is still a lot to do. But I also recently took a personality assessment, and I'm a planner. Not shocking, maybe to a lot of people who know me. And so, and I'm also a perfectionist still, which was kind of sad because I've been trying to work on that for a while, but clearly I have a ways to go. But anyways, the reason why we're talking about it now in October is that I think a lot of us who are here want to do big things and want to make big changes. And those don't happen overnight, right? And those, we don't necessarily have a secret recipe for how to go about it. If we did, it would be a lot easier, and we would see change oftentimes happen a lot faster. So as we're wrapping up this chaos that was 2022, we don't know what's going to happen in 2023, right? We know that it's probably not going to be a breeze, that there are going to be challenges. We already foresee some, finishing up the year, and there's probably unknowns. But what we do know is that, businesses are still going to need people. People should still be the number one priority, no matter what industry you're in, no matter what country you're in. And if you really want to show up, if you're a person in an organization that really wants to be the employer of choice, have that best culture, what's important for you to be thinking about? So I think there's quite a bit of research still to do around that. But being in Question Pro and having this also amazing market research arm of our business, what I did just, 2 quick hours before this is I went out and I randomly sampled 300 workers in the US, and I asked them, out of the different things your organizations, what are some of the things that are important for you, for your organization to be thinking about? Specifically, what would you like your employer to give more thought to as they start to plan for 2023? And again, this was 300 employees. It was a quick question. But I wanted to do a pulse check because as much as Al and I read and talk with different organizations, I thought, how great would it be to get what's top of mind for people today? And what was really interesting is that 36% of the people said that updating the benefits to make them more useful for the current time is one of the most important things to them. And that's my colleague Anna and I have been doing a lot of research, and benefits is something that's come up time and time again. Why? Because we have this different way of working. We're talking about flexible work environments, whether it's hybrid, as a work from anywhere, is it going back to the office? And by and far, there's some things that are still relevant from a couple of years ago, but a lot of things have changed. Like if you're a person that used to have to go into an office and you had a small child, daycare would have been something that's of utmost importance, and not might not be as much today. I was recently reading an article that there were a lot of organizations that gave nice perks of healthy food and different services inside the office. But the more that we're seeing people say, hey, listen, for the lifestyle that I have today, the ability to work from home is really critical for me. All of a sudden, a lot of those benefits that were tied to the physical office become obsolete. So I think that's one area that we can discuss a little more. But I was glad to see that from what I've seen again in other research and the inkling that I had, that people are saying this is one of the critical things for us to look at. Another thing that we asked about that came up second highest was putting more emphasis on mental health support for employees. And I do want to take a pause there because yesterday was Global Mental Health Day. So I don't think very many people are aware of that. I think if you were, on social media, you saw that come up. But one of the things that I absolutely love, and I think Alec, we need to continue to talk about more, was what does that look like? Like a couple of hours ago, I was recording a podcast with a friend of mine, and she's many things in life, also a mom and a spouse and a coach. And she studies this area called positive intelligence. And so she was talking about, what comes up in people. And I mentioned that for me, when I took the assessment, being, it's called a stickler, but really like a perfectionist was my biggest weakness. And I thought, you've got to be joking. This is something I went to therapy 15 years ago because I felt like it was holding me back. Like 15 years ago, I thought I've come a long way. What's happening here? That wasn't the point. The point was that I still, as an organizational psychologist, as somebody that talks about mental health all the time, like I still found myself a little bit reserved. Do I mention that I went to therapy 15 years ago? Do I mention that I go today? What is the stigma around that? And I will say it, and I said it consciously here again, because I do think we need to think about it more. And I do believe that, again, as somebody that is a huge proponent of it and talks about it privately all the time, the fact that I even have a little bit of pause to say it in public makes me realize how much more we need to do. So that, coupled with the data, that so many people are saying, like, I mean, I need mental health support, and whether that manifests in organizations understanding burnout better, whether it's providing services, like, I don't know, I'm not as aware, for health insurance in the US or globally, how much of that is covered financially. If it's not something that's traditionally covered, is that something that could be a very prominent benefit in organizations? There would be a huge value. So I will stop there. You can tell how incredibly passionate I am about it. And you and I talk about this quite a bit. I don't know what we can talk about both benefits and mental health. And I'll turn over the baton to you. And anybody that's listening to us, again, if you do want to share something and you don't want your name called out, we can highlight it anonymously. If you do want your name called out, absolutely. But this is something that I think is a big area of exploration. I don't think we have necessarily the answer, but we're hearing from people that it's really important. So what do we do? We got 2 months to figure it out before 2023. How do we approach this in the new year?
Well, it's thank you for calling that out. And in terms of priorities going into next year, mental health and well-being is certainly elevating in prominence, and the means in which organizations can take appropriate action and offer resources to their employees is increasing, which is great. That being said, and there's, from organizations like Better Up and Coach Up, and there's much from a kind of coaching angle, but that incorporates mindfulness and resilience and a bunch of other things. At the same time, I saw Simon Sinek being quoted recently, being the number one thing that he would like to see organizations change. I don't remember the exact phrasing of the question, but he contended that, and again, I'm paraphrasing, our ability to hold space, our ability to listen better, and just simply hold space, which I think is beautiful, and it's immensely appropriate. But you probably know where I'm going with this, is that yes, we can hold space for people, but we also have to do work. And so there's an element of productivity and tug. So where I get really excited going into this coming year, there's all this skills-based development. There's been a lot of work on well-being. I would really like to see, and again, this is me being selfish for a second, us better understand worker capacity. What can they actually do given the constraints of time, given the resources that they have, given the other things that they have going on in their lives around family, kids, other activities. Because I don't think we're very good at understanding that systematically and down to the individual level. So that is my hope, because you can offer mental health services all you want, but are people going to have the time to actually leverage those services? And are they going to actually have the time to take appropriate action, if that means resting, if that means taking time off? So we are in this very stressful period in history. Is this level of stress our new norm? Who knows? I hope it isn't, because it's pretty extraordinary when you look at
Yeah.
historical context. But at the same time, I celebrate, the mental health aspect and the well-being being a focus
Yeah.
going into year end, particularly as we reflect on the holidays. My hope is that, again, that we better understand capacity, and so people can actually take advantage of these services that organizations can offer.
Yeah.
I'll
Yeah.
run.
Oh, and it's like you always make me emotional with
Yeah.
with your comments because I think they resonate with me so much. No, thank you. I'm actually, it's good and it has me process a lot. And as you were talking about that, ever since I met you, and I think it was early on, you mentioned capacity, and it's something that really stuck with me. And it's something that I look at my career and I look at how I've treated my job. I look at what I've looked for out of my colleagues. And one of the things that I do think is important for organizations to think about is the capacity, and it's how we support each other in that. And I recently, one of my colleagues said to me, at Question Pro, we have these sessions. They're called Kaizen sessions. And every week you can sign up to talk with a different leader. And they're just phenomenal. So if for those of you, and I think there's an application even called Donut where you can use it as a technology, we literally have a spreadsheet. And we got different tabs, we got different weeks, like we made it very easy. And it's been so fulfilling for me in many ways. Now, one of the things that came up in a conversation last week is a gentleman said, there's what do you do with your team? Because I feel like you all have such a great dynamic and you just all feel very close. And oh, that meant so much to me. Like it really did, because those relationships are so important. And it's even more important because I have never met a single person on my team in real life. Like, never touched them, never hugged them.
Wow.
It's always been virtual and it's been 2 years. But what we've done, every single person, I will not take credit for this, is we really care for each other. And we've created a space in our group, in our community, where we can share what's going on in our lives openly. And why that's important is because when that happens, others step up. And they step up because almost everyone in our team has had something, right? It's been 2 years. Almost everyone's been together 2 years. And everyone, whether it's falling ill themselves, whether it's their kid, their parent, their spouse, like their house flooding, or like what, but it goes without saying that that's first and we've got you covered. And whether it requires canceling a client meeting or more often somebody stepping up because we're lucky enough that we have a big enough team that we can do that. But it's that sense of community. And I think for organizations, if you think about a manageable way to scale that, it does help capacity. It doesn't cure all of it, right? Because you could have a leader above you that's saying, well, I expect your team to do this. As the manager of that team, I think for each one of us, if that does happen, we need to step up and say, well, wait a minute, let's see how we operationalize this. Let's see if it's realistic. Let's make sure that it doesn't cause burnout. But then let's create this ecosystem. While we maybe build an entire culture in the organizations that's like that, but it's easier to manage the team that you're a part of and say, we will without question always be there for each other. It makes a world of difference. And you can measure that on things like surveys, right? You can ask the question around how the organization is showing up for you and how are others showing up for you. But again, if you're looking to make those steps, doing it with inside those ecosystems might be more manageable than saying we're going to do it on the grand scale for the whole organization, do all these things. And then what happens is I think people will lead by example. People will notice a team and say, well, wait a minute, nobody in that team is turned over. Why? These people seem really happy. What? Ah, okay.
Yeah.
It's because of the relationships they have with each other.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And I want, there's a variety of things that are coming to mind, and I'm going to have to choose one. And in the interest of time, and also in empathizing with the audience and the theme that we put forth around priorities going into next year, you mentioned asking and you mentioned surveys. And so there are some out there saying that surveys are not of great value these days. We already know what they're going to say. It's also the case where there's others who are saying, yeah, they're of value, but we don't want to over survey. And then there are still others saying that, well, we don't need to ask, not only because we know what the answer is going to be, but we have other data that can validate that we have burnout, like lagging indicators like turnover, or even
Yeah.
the behavioral data that's coming out of Slack and other collaboration tools and email
Yeah.
and Outlook and calendar data. So anyway, as a PhD psychologist, tell me about, please,
Yeah.
the values of asking the questions
Yeah.
and crafting the questions themselves.
Yeah. Oh,
Why is it important?
so I would never invalidate the value of other data, behavioral data, how people connect. However, um, when it comes to burnout, why are people burned out? What would they like to see? How can we help them? Understanding, I would say I've heard, of course, about over surveying. Is the data useful? I don't know how often. When you have a meaningful conversation with someone, you feel like you walk away with nothing. Like, even if it's a friend you feel you know really well. Like, so I'll give another example. I spend a lot of time, like, I really do love people that I work with. And so last week we had a team meeting. We have them monthly, and we decided we always do like financial updates and different things. And we decided to do something different. And this was a conversation, it wasn't a survey. I asked everybody to think about what are the things that they're really proud that they accomplished in the last 5 years, and what are some things they're really proud that they accomplished in last year. And that sprung from the book that I had mentioned to you, The Gap and the Gain, and how important it is for us to reflect on the accomplishments that we've had versus just what we haven't done yet. How important it is for us mentally, for our esteem, that it gives us energy. The reason I'm talking about that is these people, many of them, I've known them for 2 years. You could argue it's a lot, it's a little. Every one of them, nearly every one of them, I have one-on-ones with every week. Some people multiple times a week. We spend a lot of time together. Not a single person um, shared things that I knew all of it. And actually, more than that, they shared quite a few things I didn't know. And I thought, but wait a minute, we talk almost every day, and we create that space where we don't talk about just work, we talk about life. I was just talking, mentioning that. I think to assume that we know everything about our workforce, there's no way, we can't. And if we truly did 6 months ago, how different is the world today? How different is each one of those individuals? So in my ways, in my mind, I think of surveys as a conversation at scale. We talk about it as empathy at scale. I think that for people to feel seen, to feel heard, we can't undervalue that. And if you feel like you ran a survey and you didn't learn anything, call me, because I will convince you. I will Adam Grant you and make you think again. Then more than likely you're not asking the right questions, because I can tell you, I've known Martine, he's my spouse, for years. I learn something new about him every day. When I ask him the right questions, when I say, have you thought about this? Or is this important? Or how do you feel about this? So if I learn something new about someone that I've spent most of my waking time with in the last 7 years, I think it's silly to say we know everything about our workforce that we don't know nearly intimately as well as we do our friends and family. So I don't think it's about not learning something. I think it's really about challenging, like, what do we want to know? Is there something? And I will tell you, there are things I'm scared to ask Martine, because I'm like, oh, I don't know what he's gonna say. And then when he says something, then I need to do something with that knowledge. But I do, and that's something I've worked on too, because that exists, and whether I ask him or not, he feels or thinks that way. It's the same about our workforce. We might be scared to ask him certain things because what are we going to do with that information? But that exists, and if we don't ask them and if we don't acknowledge it, more than likely they will leave. And people can leave us in our lives, people can leave us in our conversations. So we need to ask the right questions to really feel like we know someone. We don't know somebody 100% no matter who they are in your life, so you can know your employees. And then the idea of over surveying is much like in a relationship, asking questions like, what am I really going to do with that information? And if I ask a million things but then I don't change my behavior and I don't do anything with it, Was it important for me to have asked in the first place? Or maybe I could have asked next month when I can actually do something with it, you know? So, that was a loaded question. You know how I feel about surveys,
I do. I
but
do.
I appreciate you asking me because, again, like jokes aside, like I don't have to work at Question Pro. Nobody held a gun to my head. Like I work for this organization because I really fully believe in the value of that information. I work with organizational network analysis before. I believe in the value of that. But if I didn't think that today, especially, we have this tremendous opportunity to get to know people better, I wouldn't be here.
Yeah. Hey, well, thank you for sharing. If only you were more passionate about it.
Next time I'll try. I'll try. It's late in the day for me. I don't.
So a question came in. Benchmarking data or normative data. What's the importance of that versus asking the the question that you might want to ask?
Yeah. So was that somebody else that knows me? That's just because it might be equally passionate about that. Well, when I think about any of the psychology and more self-help books about, what we learn about ourselves as people, um, what do we learn about comparison with others? What do we learn about in a more simple way? Like, oh, I look at Instagram and all these people are traveling everywhere. And I just traveled once this year, and I'm looking at LinkedIn and all these people are being promoted and getting awards and I'm not. Comparison, while it maybe can give us ideas, can be very dangerous. I think for an organization, there is a place for it, so we'll come to that. I do think first and foremost for an organization to understand, much like an individual, what is important to them. What are your values? Are they still what you really value? What is your mission? How are you living up to that? That is you deciding as an organization, as a human, how do you define yourself? And then saying, am I, for those things that I want to be, am I those things? So I might want to be compassionate. That could be a characteristic for an organization. It could be for a person. Am I compassionate? I would say it's infinitely more important to understand that and how you're performing against your promise versus how you might be performing compared to something with somebody else that you actually care very little about, but it's a benchmark. And it's like, oh, but this organization's doing better, but do you care? Do you care? Is that the promise that you made to yourself? Is that the promise that you made to your employees? Now, I would be silly as a scientist to say, well, benchmarks are garbage, throw them out, never look at them again. A lot of very intelligent organizations offer them because as humans, we want to understand some context. We want to understand if I'm not necessarily doing well in this, are others maybe not doing well either, or am I alone? But what we have to be very careful about is when we do that, when we think about it, to not have that drive our behavior completely. And there is some danger to that. So it's like going in and saying, yes, I want to understand what the world around me thinks and how they're doing, but I also need to be careful around what kind of action am I going to take, and is it still true to what I want to accomplish? All right, you got to ask me a last passionate question for the next one.
And thank you for saying that, because there's been an overemphasis in my view on benchmark or the use of normative data and how we define engagement, and not underappreciating the nuances given the workforce that we're responsible for at that point in time, because things do shift. And I would want a survey, which is effectively the set of questions that leaders want answers to or want some gauge to actually have the voice of the leaders themselves, as opposed to just some vendor. So there's a question that came in related to this from Jessica. You mentioned O&A, and that made me think of people analytics versus relational analytics. Analytics will replace people analytics at some point.
I'll let you take that one because I've been like in a monologue.
Well, Jessica, thanks for the question. No. So that's my answer. I do not think it will replace. I think it will become an increasingly important component of people analytics, and to I don't want to say broader extent, because this actually might be like a different layer, like employee listening right now. Like employee listening, and again, when I speak publicly, I often cite this Chinese proverb: the beginning of wisdom is calling things by their right names. So we've talked about in this short conversation around employee surveys, O&A, relational analytics, people analytics. We can throw in talent intelligence, employee listening. There's all this stuff, and it can get noisy really quick. For me, employee listening, we just want to better understand the thoughts and feelings and ideas of those within the workforce. How then do we capture those? To your point, we can capture some of that through the behavioral data, the activity data, the O&A data. There can be active O&A, passive O&A, active O&A, actually asking people about their relationships, passive being just doing it based on the data exhaust. Obviously, employee surveys can be distinct from active data insofar it's engagement survey, well-being, and other elements. So long-winded, it's not going to replace people analytics. And I will say this, there's a narrative that's being promoted out there, and I say this compassionately, and I say this in a celebratory way, I really do, that talent intelligence is going to be the overarching umbrella of people analytics. I don't agree with that. I think people, data, and analytics are still going to remain at the core, particularly when you think about data privacy and ethical use and all that. Talent intelligence, in my view, is going to be more relating to workforce planning, skills-based development, skills-based planning, and things like that. Employee listening is going to be more around the internal workforce, including employee surveys. So that's how I'm seeing the world. And the way I just described is not only Al staring at a wall and thinking this is how the world works. It's really what I'm hearing from practitioners and those within large enterprises specifically, because that's where they have the scale to do all that I just described, and drawing those meaningful distinctions. So hopefully that helped.
Well, and that's, I think what's interesting in our field, any field, is
Thank you.
that for a lot of for a lot of organizations that come up with a new strategy, a new methodology, there's a big marketing push, right? And so for you to make noise and to like say something really disruptive to get attention is oftentimes way to go. And so for us, a lot of times as consumers of all of this information and new strategies, like, well, this is going to be it, and this is going to be the only thing that's important. And it's important for us to look at it and critically think, well, is it, to echo what Al was saying, and I think Jessica, like you said, you agree as well, is that it's additive. And a lot of times when new inputs come in, I would love to believe that they're going to continue to be a part of the story, and that they're going to continue, there's going to be maybe a different place for them, but that the amount of information is going to continue to be richer for us to understand things better, connect better, know what to do better. But then maybe rarely it's really going to replace something, definitely not everything. So it's good. And again, like that's where that like marketing and the noise and catching attention versus like what's the reality of how something fits in the ecosystem. And I do think today we have more information, we have more technologies, we have more ways to know things about people. More than anything, sometimes it can be overwhelming to decide, like based on what I want to do as an organization, based on the skill sets that I have access to, what can I do? But that's one of the things, like this is separate from people analytics, but it was very eye-opening to me, is I spoke with a friend of mine, and he's a chief marketing officer in an organization, and he said how much he runs his team actually working with partners. And I thought, wow, that's brilliant. I mean, that's like, again, one of the things we do at Question Pro. We have not only a technology, but we have a whole positive people science team that works with organizations to help them understand, what do I ask? And so I think part of like our usual mentality in the organization is we have employees, and depending on what skill set I have inside my organization, what I can afford, what I can find is what I can do. But again, I go back, like I talk about community a lot because I full-heartedly believe it in different, shapes and forms. Is an organization, you can create a community, and it could be business partners, it could be consultants or contractors, it could be an advisory board. But what's a less traditional way to actually interact with others, to excel and have exponential knowledge that's not purely dependent on who you can hire full-time as a part of your team, which again, I think for a while has been the mentality of a lot of organizations. I think we'll see that, and I hope we see that shift, because we can bring in different skill sets to help us advance different projects in different parts of the organization, but without necessarily having to make this like permanent long-term investment, which oftentimes actually makes us shy away from it. To say, well, we don't know how long we're going to do this. We don't really need to know if we add someone. If you can bring somebody in to help shape something, then you can decide, well, yes, wow, this was incredibly valuable. I want to do this long term. Or I'm so glad that we did this project. I think we really got as much as we could out of it at the time. Now we can move on to something else that's going to be of additive value.
Yeah. So, yeah, as we start to wrap up, and again, thank you all for joining us today. I have long, and just a quick anecdote story. Years ago, I was asked to formulate a retention strategy, and I was kind of taken back by, well, what am I supposed to just do that? Just how am I supposed to do that? Because I asked, well, what are our exit surveys data? Well, we don't really have good exit survey data. Well, can we reach out to them afterwards? Maybe can we still contact them? Well, there might be, issues with that. We might not, have their personal emails, and say, well, if we don't know why they're leaving, maybe we can do focus groups. So anyway, where I'm getting at this is that unless we investigate, we're just guessing. We're just, so there's a constant, to your earlier point, constant learning. And then it invites the question, how do we learn? And yes, we can take this data exhaust now, and we can do it in an ethical and responsible way. We can ask more appropriate questions and get better insights. Is it compensation? Is it relationships? Is it lack of resources, lack of career mobility? All these things. We can get, insights into this, but we need to understand what's appropriate at that point in time. And that doesn't happen unless we do the work. And so I just want to celebrate and amplify, what you were just sharing there. And in that regard, I would hope that as you all formulate your HR or people strategies for next year, that you're not doing that in a vacuum, that you're not just taking leading practices that was, read in a magazine last week, that what you put together as your priorities are appropriate for the system, for the people within the system that you're responsible for at this point in time. So that's my hope. That's my hope. So, as we start to wrap up, Sanja, any last words or ideas? And, I want to make sure that we promote X Day as well.
Yeah. And I put in some special codes again to our private chat. Next time I'll figure out how to send it to everyone. But completely echo what Al was saying. This planning is not going to be one size fits all for all of the organizations. Who you stand for, or what you stand for, who you want to be, what promises you want to live up to. It's critical that those guide your plans. One thing that I would recommend, choose one bold bet. Do it based on data, but do something that you think it's maybe a little wild. And that if it works, it'll be phenomenal. And that if it doesn't, you are proud that you tried. It can just be one, because it'll probably be effort. You want to see how it goes, but the world around us is changing. Oftentimes we feel like we don't have control of that. And a lot of these, things that are unforeseen are happening. So make one bold move in your organization, like make a big bet, do it based on, informed data. Don't just, be wild and pull something out of thin air, measure it after. But I think 2023, it's important for it to be about that. It's important for us to really think about, how do we challenge status quo? What is that story that we can build for ourselves and either be so incredibly proud of, or say, you know what, I'm really glad that I took that bet. It didn't pan out exactly the way I wanted to. I learned an infinite amount of things from it, but wow, am I glad that I did it. So that would be my kind of like very high level, not a cookie cutter recipe, but like get out there and just shake things up.
Well, that's what's warranted. Disruption
Yeah.
warrants disruption. We can't just press reset on the things that we're comfortable with from the past. So I couldn't agree more. So thank you for sharing that. And I also want to give a quick plug for those who are part of the PFAL community. Thank you for those who want to learn more and join. It's $6 per month or $50 per year. You can go to PFAL.net and learn more. And finally, Sanja has a discount code for X Day, and I'm going to pull it up real quick. And
it's either my name, Sanja, or Pafa 100. So with that one, if you're joining us today, you can get a complimentary ticket as a thank you for being part of this conversation.
All right, well, there it is. There it is. Got it. PFAL 100 will be the discount. So, Sanja, thank you for being your awesome self. Thank you all for listening or watching the recording, as the case may be. And look forward to seeing you very soon. And if you're in the Austin area, well, we'll be back next week. Again,
Yes.
1 p.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. Eastern. Unless Sanja usurps this authority, we're going to talk about the AI Bill of Rights that came through the White House, and just ethics and responsible use, and how to manage the laws and legislation that are coming down the pipe. And again, we're not going to get into details on the specific laws themselves. That being said, we are going to talk about some highlights and what it means for us doing everything from employee surveys to doing deeper analytics, because it affects us all in the discipline. So join us next week. And finally, once again, if you're in Austin or the San Antonio area, 26th, which is a Wednesday, 27th, learn more at questionpro.com or PFAL.net. Sanja, anything else?
No, that's it. Thank you, everybody, so much for joining us. Thank you, Al, for this amazing conversation. And again, see you next week. And really hope to see you all in Austin in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, super fun. Looking forward to it. All right, take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.